Please welcome Barry Klein.
Okay. Give me a minute. If I got everything here that I'm going to need. Yeah. Okay. Okay, well, I'm Barry Klein, and I'm the president of the Houston Property Rights Association. I've been active politically for a long time, since about 1982. And I'm here to talk about ideas on how to reframe transportation planning. Government planners deceive the public by using 3 different methods. They refer to the Texas Transportation Institute mobility reports, which are well known to have many flaws. They rely on long-range transportation or traffic models that make long-range projections on future traffic, and those are also flawed. And then thirdly, they produce shoddy, untrustworthy reports justifying new rail lines and extensions. So those are the primary ways that they argue that we should be fighting congestion, and I argue that congestion actually is an acceptable part of urban life and is greatly exaggerated as a problem, and we should learn to, for the most part, live with it. Now, I want to give you some history of myself. I was doing real estate in, when was that, 1982, when I was working with some civic clubs, and we put together a coalition. I was reading Reason magazine at that time, and reading articles about taxis and jitneys and how local laws across the country suppress the industry. And I was working with several civic clubs, so I put together a coalition. We went down to City Hall and asked for changes in the Houston laws on taxis and jitneys. And so that actually resulted in some study, which it did not actually lead to change at that time, but there was some positive results that came years later. Now, later that year, our transit authority announced it was going to move forward on its heavy rail plan. I'd heard some bad things about heavy rail from friends who had fought the agency at the point of creation in 1978. And I was worried that this was a big error that could not be easily reversed and needed my attention and time. So I began to study the issue, found out who I should be calling and talking to what now I know are, I soon learned, are big names in the transportation industry, or in the industry that studies transit, and organized a group of friends out of the libertarian movement, and we went to some Metro meetings, and then I went to the very first meeting in September 1982 where they were going to allocate some budget money for that, and I was the only voice there speaking against the plan. But there were 19 people there to speak against details of that plan, so it was controversial from the start, particularly the plan to put an elevated section on Main Street. This is a response to the fact that the Reagan administration had something called a no money for new starts program, and so Metro said we can build this on our own. We've got a 1% sales tax, and we don't need the federal money. So the way they're going to save money was by building elevated on Main Street rather than go underground. But that proved to be very, very controversial. In the course of our work to stop that, Metro held a secret meeting at one of our most prestigious golf clubs, and awarded the contract for rail cars. I think it was $128 million. The press sniffed this out a day or two later and alerted me to it, and so I began looking for some legal help to bring a lawsuit. We managed to find that help through Common Cause and some other fortunate contacts, and we sued the agency. We lost the first round, we won the second round, but that took place after an election that came in the spring. And in the end, we actually did defeat that at the polls, heavy rail plan, and then they used our lawsuit to negotiate a smaller penalty on that contract for the rail cars as they broke the contract. There was actually a second group that materialized in the course of all that, which was headed up by a local councilman who turned out to be a monorail advocate, and he learned some things from other monorail advocates that showed him that Metro was deceiving him. So he got angry and became actually the face of the opposition. So we were the smaller group that actually started the opposition. We built up some momentum. He picked up on it, and unfortunately worked out fine at that point. And of course, in doing all that, I stopped doing real estate, just stayed with what I thought was a lot more fun, was dealing with government and trying to be a reformer. And just, in the course of all this, I had to study all aspects of local decisions regarding all things of life, congestion, air pollution, traffic, and I found all that very engrossing, so I just stayed with it. And I shouldn't forget, so a very important thing that happened during this time. In early 1983, I was walking past a newspaper rack and glanced into it, and I saw a headline story about a new federal report that had been released on average commuting times across the country. Now, I've been fighting our transit agency, which is projecting gridlock in the future year, probably 20 years out, and this story revealed the fact that the travel time for all American cities was under half an hour for the average commute. It was a revelation to me. Very exciting. I bought 3 copies of that issue, and I've looked at that story many, many years since. And it actually shaped my thinking about traffic. Traffic, I've come to realize, is a self-regulating, self-limiting, self-solving problem. And I came to encounter articles written by people who have much better credentials than my own, who reached something of the same conclusion. I'd like to mention 4 of those people. One is Yaakov Zahavi, Israeli-born, moved to the U.S., worked for the World Bank, worked with Gabriel Roth. I'm sorry Gabriel's not here this morning to hear me tell about this. And he actually wrote some seminal papers looking at the pattern of human travel, concluded that we actually have 2 budgets. We have a money budget and a time budget. And so that we spend perhaps up to, I think it's 14% of our annual income on travel, and we want to spend an hour or perhaps a little bit more in time. And those are the 2 constraints that tend to settle our pattern of travel. And we even have an appetite for travel. We want to travel. We enjoy travel. I tell in my life, I spend a lot of my day working in my office, and then I get out in my car and take care of the business, and it's a pleasure to get out on the road. So I personally have my daily, or sometimes not every day, but my weekly travel. Another person who's found the same pattern is an Italian physicist, now in his 90s, I think. I think you pronounce his name as Cesare Marchetti, and he came across the idea that humans like to travel, do it about an hour of travel a day. There's some research concluded it goes back 5,000 years in the span of human time. And so his theorem is known as the Marchetti constant. Another person who's reached the same conclusion is Patricia Mokhtarian, a professor of engineering at Davis College, University in California. And she's written papers along this. She's actually what we call a disciple of Yaakov Zahavi, as are other people. And another person is Randall O'Toole. Randall O'Toole mentions this phenomenon in his book, Land Use Without Planning. And let's see if I got the quote here, which is, I think, yes. I know many of you have bought that issue, that book, and so you can find this on page 32. People seem to have 2 budgets for travel, a dollar budget and a time budget. When incomes are low relative to the cost of driving, the dollar amount is their limiting factor. When incomes are high enough, the time budget becomes a limiting factor. People won't average more than about 1.1 to 1.3 hours a day traveling, no matter how low the cost. So I think that's something to keep in mind. We can live with congestion, we want to travel, and we find a way to keep our travel in an acceptable number of minutes per day. Now that's sort of like the overall population. Not every person has to travel every day. Now other researchers in the field have reached the conclusion that congestion is a tolerable fact of life, and among those people is Melvin Weller. He's now deceased. He's one of the people I talked to in 1982, longtime head of the University of California Transportation Center. Brian Taylor, the chief of the UCLA Department of Urban Planning, and Anthony Downs, a well-known urban scholar with the Brookings Institute. All these people have written or made statements recorded by the media indicating that they see congestion as something we can all learn to live with and keep as a simple part of our life. Now, something which is also on my mind is the Texas Transportation Institute reports. They've been around, I guess, for 15 or 20 years. Many people have found problems with them. As a result, TTI has changed the methodology. But I think they have two continuing problems that objections I have to their way of evaluating the so-called problem of congestion. One is the value they place on what they call the time wasted, that time between how quickly you can get to your work site if you didn't have to deal with traffic, and how long it takes when you have to deal with traffic. And so that difference in time is wasted time, they say, and I say it's not wasted. People oftentimes find that time productive. They're thinking, they're planning their day, they're listening to the radio, listening to the news, they're having some quiet time. They might even be on the phone, might be texting, doing something productive. And so it's not entirely wasted. In fact, apparently there's always been some who actually enjoyed that travel, that commuting time. And we heard Alan Pizarski acknowledge, discussed what has been revealed in the recent Census Bureau survey that shows that there's a growing number of people who actually enjoy the commute. And this sort of information is being left out of all the conversations about traffic and congestion. Now, among the critics of deceptive planning are several people who are quite well known in the transportation field. One is Don Pickrell with Volpe Transportation Center. He wrote his criticism as early as 1989 in a paper entitled Urban Rail Transit Projects, Forecast versus Ridership and Cost. Now, these are people who actually are saying we're being lied to. And they're saying either directly, explicitly, or they're saying it very, very implicitly, not so implicitly, pretty baldly. Another is Martin Wax. Now, Marty Wax is one of the people I talked to in '82 along with John Kane, the next person I'll mention. And he's the former chair of the UCLA Department of Urban Planning. He's now with RAND. And in 1990, he wrote a paper titled Ethics and Advocacy and Forecasting for Public Policy. In 1990, John Kane, the chair of the Economics Department at Harvard, wrote Deception in Dallas, about the plan, how they justify with deception the rail scheme in Dallas. He wrote a similar one for Houston. I met John Kane along with Don Pickrell when they were hired by the head of the transit, chairman of the transit agency in Houston in 1989 to evaluate the rail plan that had been approved by the voters in '88 based on deceptive information from Metro. And then more recently in 2002, a Danish researcher, Bent Flitterberg, I know I've got that wrong. Now at Oxford, he wrote Underestimating Cost in Public Work Projects. And then, of course, more recently, people we know well, Randall O'Toole and Wendell Cox, have also written quite explicitly that we're being lied to in the case of studies justifying rail. But despite all this information from all these people who have these superb credentials, it isn't actually making much impact in the policy making, or what Congress does, or what local agencies do. So here's my ideas on how we can build a pathway to reform, how we can reframe transportation planning. We've got to alert the political village. Now, what is the political village? In my city of Houston, there's about 10,000 people in that region. And those are people who are active in civic clubs and political clubs, trade associations, chambers of commerce, civic clubs, that all the groups that pay some kind of attention to policy making and setting. Not the ordinary citizen. It's a smaller number, only about 10,000, I'm guessing. And that's a number that can be approached and reached by say an underfunded reform effort. And I suspect that every city has that same phenomenon taking place. And then I also suggest two tactics. You have to do public education. You have to bring to the public attention Randall's research. And we know it's available to us. We know how to find it, but it has to be brought to the attention of the political village where they can easily access it. And Randall's also produced in his book, Gridlock, several ideas on how we can reform the federal planning process to get away from the problems we currently have. That should all be part of this educational program. And we should also be talking about the flaws in the computer modeling. I think that can be extremely important. Right now in Texas, we're going to be voting on funding a 50-year water plan based, of course, again, on computer modeling. And of course, all those flawed assumptions will be built into the water modeling plan as it is in the transportation planning. So if you can show the truth about the unreliability about computer modeling, you can actually undercut government at many levels and start to ratchet it back in many ways, save us a lot of money and regain some lost freedom. Another thing I think is important is to expose the subjectivity in planning. Now I'm wearing my button today. It says subjectivity and spontaneousness. I think those should be the watchwords of reform, because in fact, no matter how honest and how much integrity a planner may have, we still have to admit, he would still admit that there are subjective decisions being made in how he analyzes things. And of course, subjectivity is very much what the private sector does too. It simply is a part of life, and that word is simply missing from these policy debates. Okay. We should be, secondly, we should be taking advantage of the research done by the Lucy Burns Institute. Now, I've talked to many people in the last couple of days about the Lucy Burns Institute. The Lucy Burns Institute is an organization in Wisconsin, and they produced this booklet this year titled Local Ballot Initiatives. And they took a look at all 50 states and the rules for doing petition drives at the local level to set local policy. And on page 12, they summarize the results in 5 different images. So what they show is that in this country we have 22,000 plus cities. A large number are home rule cities with charters. And I realize, it's easy to understand, that most of those cities are small population. That means on election day, when you have only a few voting sites in these smaller cities, a handful of committed activists can actually do a petition drive when the voters come to vote, get enough signatures on that one day, or perhaps in the succeeding days if you fall short, and get an election to amend the charters in these small cities. That means we can actually become lawmakers. As citizen legislators, we can actually write law and start to change the policy making at the local level in most jurisdictions in this country. And as we do that, we can actually send a signal to those people who have enough resources to play meaningful politics in bigger cities, and they can fund petition drives in those cities. Now, I've been involved with petition drives, big and small. In my city, it now takes you $30,000 to $40,000 to do a petition drive. But you can do more than one. You can do 2. Just send the voter 2 petitions in the same envelope. And I've done that. So you can actually be effective if you have the money. I'm saying that if you can be effective at the lower level where volunteers can do it, that'll send a signal to those of us in the free market community who have more resources to do the same thing in the middle cities and the big cities. We can start to get the country back. And we can amend charters to do things like not fund rail system. Right now, as I'm speaking, back in Texas, there are 2 petition drives being done. One is to get rid of fluoride in the city of San Marcos. The other is to stop the city of Elgin from funding to help fund a rail line out of Austin to Elgin, which is east of Austin. So that's how you can actually affect local policy by amending charters. They can have an effect on things like New Start. I also think you can use the charter amendment process to give directions to the city officials who end up on the MPO boards. Not sure about that. It may take a clever lawyer to figure that out by looking at state law, federal law, to get that language right. But hopefully it's there, and that's the way to start setting the direction of the local regions through the things that the MPO does. Okay, the other answer to this problem is how do you fund all this? I've got the 2% solution. Looking at the think tanks around the country, we've got about 60 at the state level, maybe a dozen or more at the federal level. Their budgets may add up to, what, 200 million? So you take 2% of that, you've got $4 million. We've got 50 top or large urban areas, 50 into 4 million, and you've got, I guess, $80,000. So $80,000 for the large urban areas can be used to hire somebody to go out and give presentations, give slide presentations using the information that Randall and others have come up with, and bring the truth of all these important matters that are being shaped by perverse incentives, bring the truth to the public and to the political village, and start to change policy, start to amend charters, and that's how we can reframe transportation policy in America. Thank you very much.